Chapter 11. I hadn't realized it was this bad, said Pam, climbing from the car to take a closer look. There's nothing left, is there? I met her off the train at Reading and driven her out to Bowershow Farm to see the damage. To view the ruins might be a more accurate description, given the destructive power of spray paint, petrol, oil, rubber, and assorted solvents were ignited under the right conditions. 3 days had passed since the fire, and all that was now left of Napier Classic convertibles was piled in two large skips, ready for disposal. The workshop itself had been reduced to its blackened brick walls and concrete base. I still have the Bentley Continental down at the showroom, I said, joining her in the middle of the yard. Dominic's father might yet offer me a good price for it. You're not thinking of winding the business up, are you? Pam turned and said at me. The hint of resignation in my voice seemed to have worried her. I mean, this is a big blow, obviously, but it's hardly terminal. That remains to be seen, I grinned ruefully. Clients aren't going to be keen to entrust their cars to me after this, are they? We're supposed to restore them, not cremate them. And then there's the question of how much I'm going to have to pay out by way of compensation. Isn't that covered by insurance? Not necessarily. Insurance companies get twitchy where arson's concerned. Who's to say I didn't do it myself? They surely don't suspect that. The sisters who come to see me seem the type who makes a point of suspecting that, and I can say I can't blame them. Can't blame him. An anonymous and motiveless arsonist doesn't score highly on the plausibility scale. But you said on the phone you knew who it was. Oh, I do. That's why it was so urgent we meet. I'm sorry to have dragged you up here, but with so many clients to grovel to, not to mention the insurance companies. You don't need to apologize. Pam let me know by the tilt of her eyes that she knew I was procrastinating. Just explain, Chris. All right, come over to the car. There's something I ought to show you. She followed me back to the stag, and we sat inside. I reached across her to the glove compartment and took out the envelope and saw her frown in puzzlement recognition. Surely that's the photograph that should be in your bureau, yes. But had you missed it? Yes, I assumed Trevor had taken it. I sent taps to demand it back from him, but he denied all knowledge. That didn't surprise me. I thought he'd have destroyed it by then anyway. More fool me, I reckon, for not having the locks changed, but now it looks as if it wouldn't have made much difference. She glared at me. Well, the woman on the bed and the arsonist are one and the same. I've already met her, you see, posing as, but that doesn't matter. What does is that I needed the picture because it's the only available likeness of her, and I've had it copied since. I've always intended to return the original to you. Her glare was becoming one of anger as well as disbelief. I don't understand any of this. She's out to hurt us in any way she can. Us. You, me, Trevor, maybe Mum and Dad too. You must warn them to be on their guard, Tabs and Dominic's as well. Setting up Trevor was one thing. This, I gestured towards the child skeleton in the workshop, means I can't say what she mightn't do next. Who is she? I don't know. You must have some idea. No, Pam, I don't. I literally haven't a clue, except that it's something to do with Nikki. Nikki, I think so, yes. That's mad. Well, isn't this? And what she did to Trevor? Extreme, verging on mad, wouldn't you say? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I had no idea she'd go this far. And how far do you think she will go? There's no way to judge. My God, the hotel, you don't think she might try the same trick twice? Strangely enough, no. That doesn't seem to be her style. The unexpected more her stock in trade. Just a minute. Pam's gaze narrowed. This isn't some story you cooked up with Trevor, is it? To make me feel sorry for him, because if it is, it won't work. You can. She broke off and glanced around, looking suddenly crestfallen. Sorry, I've been rather silly, aren't I? I'm forgetting this really happened. Yes, it really did. Where did you go from here? Commercially, I haven't even begun to think. Maybe I should start again at my beginning and never breathe a word about my loss. Kipling? That's right. If was printed on a tea towel I kept in the office to dry the coffee mugs. Fine words, but no doubt one of the first things to go up in smoke. Talk to Dad. I know you don't like asking him for help, but you'll be a rich man one day thanks to him, so why not? Thanks to Uncle Joshua, actually. I gave her a tight little smile. Let's not forget whose money it really is. All right, Uncle Joshua, but the point is I intend to find out what this is all about before I start trying to build the house business back up. I don't want the rug to pull from under me a second time. Shouldn't you have leave that to the police? There's nothing to go on. They have a picture of the arsonist. I grimace. As a matter of fact, they don't. I haven't shown them the photograph. Why not? This is no time to be squeamish, Trevor. Well, you just have to. It's got nothing. It's nothing to do with Trevor. Why then? Because it doesn't prove a thing. And besides, I have this. I gaze through the windscreen towards the green horizon beyond the burnt-out shell of my hard-won business reputation. I have this feeling the answer's close to home, and no outsider stands a chance of finding it. What's more, if and when we do it, that we'll be grateful if we keep it to ourselves. Life went on. Looking back at the autumn of 1947, it's the normality of the daily routine, the absence of emotional response to the grinding tragedy of Michael Lanyon's fate that seems the most bemusing feature. I went to school from Monday to Friday, and on some Saturdays as well. The shop traded as usual, the family functioned as it always had, or so it seemed. What went on while I was out of the way, what secretive anticipation there was of the material consequence for us of unfolding events, I simply don't know. But then I didn't appreciate just how significant those consequences would be, and nobody was inclined to tell me, because merely to speak of it would have seemed to wish it so, and hence to wish Michael Lanyon dead. Not that wishing was likely either to condemn him or to save him. The law had its methods and was in the process of applying them. A few weeks after trial, on appeal was heard and dismissed. Then a couple of days later, the announcement of Tully's reprieve. Grant took this as a personal insult. How dare a Labour politician come to the rescue of my brother's killer? She complained. Mr. Chutter, Ed Party here, serving somehow to exaggerate the offence. What on earth does he know about it? The question went unanswered, but the judge had recommended mercy in Tully's case, so it shouldn't really have come as such a big surprise to her. Belatedly, public opinion got in on the act. People suddenly realised that one of the Truro murder pair was to hang, and that struck many of them as fundamentally unfair. Both or neither was the gist of letters that appeared in the press, and more than one editorial, even in the Cornish papers. Only now did people realise what was actually about to happen. The staff of Kite and Dew got up a petition. Evelyn King, the local MP, raised the matter in the House of Commons. The Western Morning News carried an interview with Rose and Cordelia Lanyon, who were still lodging in Exeter. They'd written to the King and Queen, pleading with them to intervene. They expressed the hope that hearts would soften in the run-up to Princess Elizabeth's wedding, and mentioned the distraught state of Michael Lanyon's son. Ah, Nicky, now I guard my thoughts of him as the days and weeks slip by. Now how I hid my wish to help him, as if it were some vice to be ashamed of. I wrote him a letter at one point, a stilted expression of sympathy that it was probably just as well I didn't send. The lack of an address for him in Exeter was the reason, I told myself, but it was more in the way of an excuse. I saw Ethel Jago in Boscawen Street one Saturday afternoon, and could have asked her for the address if I really wanted to know it. But I didn't even speak to her. Instead, I dodged down Cathedral Lane to avoid being sent, and so came to the point of the other end of the lane where I'd had my last sight of Uncle Joshua 3 months before. I remembered the half-crown piece he'd tossed me twinkling in the sunlight. I still had the coin in my pocket. I carried it about with me all the time. It was the cinema, of course, and I hadn't been to the cinema since. It was for me and Nicky. Now I realised it never would be spent, nor its appointed purpose, so I resolved to keep it as a symbol of the ending of things. I wonder when and how I lost it. In the confusion of a house move, perhaps, or the long careless stretch of my late 20s and early 30s, then when reminders of the past, whether sweet or sour, were anathema to me. I wish I hadn't, not as clearly as I wish other things, but I wish it even so. The future's a two-edged sword, Uncle Joshua said that day, and he was right, but he might have gone on to mention that the past is sharper, even though it's a single blade. The royal wedding came and went without news of a reprieve. Letters to the press went unheeded. Appeals for clemency fell upon deaf ears. What the law had decreed it seemed determined to dispense. The appointed day dawned mild and wet in Truro, unremarked. a pawn in the Napier household, though filling the thoughts of every one of us as we rose and washed and ate our breakfast and engaged in our pretense of normality, except that the subdued tones in which we spoke, the silent wireless and unopened newspapers, weren't normal at all. Pam and I usually squabbled over the last slice of toast, but that day we left several slices untouched in the rack. Just before 8 o'clock, Michael Lanyon was marched to the scaffold in Exeter Prison. I was on my way to school at the time, trailing listlessly along Quay Street. At the City Hall, clock struck the hour behind me. My parents were already serving in the shop, while back at Crescent Road, Gran was readying herself to join them. A few minutes later, Michael Lanyon was dead. In Truro, nothing marked his going. The rain continued to fall, my footsteps to carry me forward. Life went on. I headed north on Monday morning. Sunshine and showers chased me along the scarp line of the Chilterns until I hit the M1, then fell away behind as the long grey motorway miles wound out like a reel, the sky leadening as the winds weakened, the day stretching and thinning around me. Calderdale that afternoon looked autumnally benign. The moors had plainly a picturesque. I drove into Hebden Bridge from the east and saw it as its meekest, the chimney smokeless, the mill silent. I saw it, indeed, as the stone and the slate ghosts of a dead industry. Only geographically was it the same place Inspector Treffry had come to 34 years before. In every other sense it was a world away. The family firm Tully had fled, must surely have been buried by history. But history had left abundant traces in the double-decker back-to-back houses clinging to the sheer valley walls, in the ranks of barrack block-built mills crammed along the riverside. The to let and for sale signs were up, but Edmund Tully Pass was still there in this town. I sensed it as much as I knew it, driving out for a mile over the moors, and then back into the tangle of steps and streets and secret ways he'd once called home. Edmund Tully had gone, but he'd left some part of himself behind. I booked into the White Lion Hotel, then walked out into the town as a grey evening settled over it like a shroud. A group of standard issue youths sat on a wall in the central square, but there was nothing they could have told me, apart from how grim it was to be young in Hebden Bridge. It was their parents' memories and their parents that I needed to tap. The bar of the Albert, a smoky Victorian street corner local, seemed like a good place to start. Tully, you say? Growled an old man in a grimy suit and flat cap, breaking off from glum scrutiny of the Halifax Courier. It's a good long while since I heard anyone asking after that firm, and a longer one since it were a going concern. When would you reckon Tully went bust, Bert? Must be 20 years at least, replied the man sat next to him, a marginally smarter but similarly lugubrious fellow. Well, 20 since Henry Tully died, at any rate, and the carpet-bagging son of his closed the place down within a 12-month. Henry Tully was the original owner. No, that was the father, Abraham Tully. So Henry Tully had to be the brother Treffry had spoken back in 1947. You remember old Abel, Wilf? I do, a hard man, and not noted as a fair one. What line of business were they in? Fuchsian, said Bert, who was emerging as the more forthcoming of the two. Like the rest of the mills here, cloth for coats and trousers and such, but it all comes in from abroad now. Tully's made good money till foreign competitors finish them. The son, where does he live? Spain, last I heard. None of the family left round here? Not a one. Hold up, Bert, said Wilf. That can't be right. What about the old lady? Oh, Miriam, I was forgetting her. Who's she? Henry Tully's widow. And she still lives here? No, not in Hebden, no. Old people's home, up Keighley way. You don't want to see her, surely. Why wouldn't I? The two exchanged a look, then Bert said, "Gone in the head, son. That's what they reckon. Do you happen to know the address of the home?" "Can't say I do." Wilf gave a shrug to indicate he had no idea either. "We're not likely to be herring up there to visit her, are we? The Tullys were owners and the likes of us were workers, till the South Koreans put us all out of a job. Big bugs and little ones don't mix, at least not in this town. What'd you say? You were interested in them? We might be distantly related." You'd be distantly related to a murderer then. Oh? Henry Tully's brother Edmund murdered a bloke down south just after the war. We thought he'd swing for it, but he wriggled out of that, just like he wriggled out of Hebden when it suited him. You knew him. By sight and reputation, eh? But it's more than 40 years since he buggered off, and he's not been back since. They let him out of prison a few years ago, I heard. The good Lord alone knows why, and it's only God who'll know what's become of him since. He's not be, he'll not be found here in a hurry, that's certain. But I wasn't certain. Home is where you start from, and it's the last place to forget you. I rose early next morning, walked up past the Tully's old house in Birchcliff Road. It was in the middle of a row of imposing Victorian villas overlooking the town. Snob Row, Bert and Wilf had called it. They hadn't said which one had belonged to the Tullys, nor which of the redundant mills clogging the valley floor below had paid for it. I'd have liked to know, but it really didn't matter. One was the same as the other. Hebden Bridge, Oxford, Malaya, Truro. That was the route map of his life. I felt I only had to follow the arrows to find where he was hiding. Back at the White Line after breakfast, I started phoning round all of the residential homes with Kingsley's numbers. The third one I tried, Ravensthorpe Lodge, confirmed that Miriam Tully lived there, and that visitors were always welcome. Murder defines the murderer as well as his victim. Everything else they did and were becomes a subordinate to the terminal event. No other way of denying has quite the same binding power. Joshua Carnaworth wasn't remembered in Truro as a Tina Maygood, a lovelong wanderer or a sentimental loner, but as the rich old man stabbed to death at the top of Lemon Street in August 1947, nor was Michael Lanyon recalled as a glamorous war hero or a hard-working auctioneer, only as the Avaricus scheme responsible for the stabbing had gone to the gallows a few months later. The rest, their lives and loves, their failures and success, were discarded as so much unnecessary detail. I sensed the process taking hold around me as autumn becomes winter and all the protests and arguments and niggling inconsistencies were forgotten in the face of one pragmatic truth. Both men were dead and buried. Neither was coming back to life, any more than the Lanyons were coming back to Truro. A line had been drawn, an episode closed, it was over. But its consequence remained to be assimilated. I don't know when or how I realised my family had become rich upon, beyond their most optimistic estimates of Uncle Joshua's death. Mr. Clark no doubt dispensed his secrets with a grudged hand, and the settling of a murdered man's estate is presumably a complicated affair. Certainly Gran and my father spent many an hour closeted in Mr. Clark's offices that December. Gradually, however, the awareness seeped into tea-time conversation and my own limited view of the future. This will set us nicely, Dad cautiously admitted one day. But at Christmas, tongue loosened by port, he was more expansive and rather more accurate. We'll be able to live like kings. To think he had so much, and to think it all came to us. To be strictly accurate, it had come to Gran, and though she was to develop a liking for extravagance, it would remain as it began, purposeful. Moving to Straw House and fitting it out as a stylish residence would establish us as a family of substance, expanding a small grocery shop with a one-room credit drapery business above into a regional chain of department stores would seal our reputation for acumen and industry. These ambitions of hers became the destinies of each of us. That was a long time before I understood what they amounted to. Meanwhile, undreamt of luxuries were there to be enjoyed. To celebrate my 12th birthday in March 1948, we all went to London for a long weekend at the start of the Easter school holidays, which fell early that year. We stayed at Claridge, took a boat trip along the river, visited the tower, and went to see the new smash hit American musical Annie Get Your Gun. I can still remember the sights and sounds of the evening. Its intoxicating metropolitan sense of energetic fun. It put right out of my mind, as perhaps it was intended to, all conscious memory of my joint birthday party with Nicky at Straw House the same year before. It was our home now, not the Lanyons, our future, not theirs, and I was beginning to enjoy their transformation. Ravensthorpe Lodge was one of several high-gabbled Victorian residences on the northwestern outskirts of Keighley, leafy, tranquil, and blessed with what I assume would have been a panoramic view of Airedale and the Pennies, but for the drizzling pall of cloud that had descended as I drove across the moors from Hepton Bridge. Miriam Tully wasn't in the lounge, where most of the residents were taking morning coffee to the booming accompaniment of our natural history document on the television. Not one of our more sociable ladies, the nurse who greeted me confided, which was just as well. What I wanted to talk to her about wasn't going to be aided by having to shout over a commentary on the grazing habits of wildebeest. She was sitting in an armchair by the window of her room, reading a large print Dick Francis novel, white-haired, slope-shouldered, and clearly in physical decline, as her clumsily buttoned dress and the walking frame standing in readiness by the chair confirmed. She nevertheless looked better and more alert than Bert had led me to expect. Visitor for you, Miriam, said the nurse. The gentleman who phoned earlier. Phone? Said Miriam in a crackling, querulous voice. I phoned nobody. Can't afford to be at the rates you charge. I'll leave you to it, the nurse whispered to me, as she slipped out, a touch of resignation detectable in her tone. You from the council, Miriam asked, looking up as I approached, her pale blue eyes magnified alarmingly by her glasses. High time you checked up on those people. I'm nothing to do with the council, I said, drawing up a chair and venturing a smile as I sat down. My name's Napier. I'm hoping you can help me. Can't think now how. I'm looking for your brother-in-law, Edmund Tully. My brother's dead, and his name isn't Edmund. Your brother-in-law. I'm sure you know who I mean. I don't understand anything, she pouted. Matron, will you tell them that? Come on, Miriam. I don't think there's anything wrong with. How dare you say my Christian name? She glared at me. Did I give you permission? Perhaps I forgot. They tell me I'm so forgetful, or perhaps I didn't, and you're merely displaying the presumptuousness of your generation, in which case... Sorry. I held my hand in surrender. I stand rebuked. Quite right, Mrs. Tully. Who did you say you were? Chris Napier. Never heard of you. Joshua Carnot's nephew. Who? The man your brother-in-law murdered. Murder? She grew suddenly thoughtful and carefully set her book aside. Such an ugly deed. Do you know where Edmund is? He should be dead by rights, dead, like my poor dear Henry. But he isn't. She shrugged. I don't know. I can only hope so. Your uncle wasn't his only victim. He as good as murdered Henry, bottled up the shame he felt for what his brother had done, took him to an early grave. He'd have kept the mill open, you know. He'd have found a way to make it profitable. Then Richard wouldn't have been able to sell off the family silver and lock me up here. Richard's your son, a thankless child, and therefore sharper than a serpent's tooth. There's a streak. Oh, this is Astro. Hi, Astro. She shrugged. I don't know. I can only hope so. Your uncle wasn't his only victim. He's as good as murdered Henry. Bottled up his shame he felt for what his brother had took him to an early grave. He'd been kept. Oh, yeah. Anyway, then Richard would have been able to sell off the family silver and lock me up here. Richard's your son, a thankless child, and therefore sharper than a serpent's tooth. There's a streak in him of his uncle's nature. He sits out there in Spain, running that sports clinic he set up with the money he got from cashing in on 2 generations of sober industry. He sits there by my swimming pool, sipping Pimm's while I have to. She broke off and frowned, as if aware she might have said too much. Well, I dare say this is getting us nowhere. When did you last see your brother-in-law, Mrs. Tully? Edmund? Yes, I said, trying to remain patient. Edmund. Oh, many years ago, before the war. He announced one day that he was off to London to take up a job offered him by somebody he knew from Oxford Insurance, as I recall, about which Edmund would have known less than nothing. He hated Hepton Bridge, said it was too small, too hostile an environment for his exotic talent to bloom in. What he really couldn't abide was working under Henry. He thought a university education entitled him to a senior position in the firm, but he wasn't prepared to earn it. He never was prepared to apply himself to anything, come to that. A feckless boy and a worthless man. I always knew he'd come to no good. Do you remember the names of his friend in London or the company he worked for? Gone, I'm afraid. Edmund didn't stay there long, but he didn't come back to Hepton Bridge, not once, even to his mother's grave. She died while he was a prisoner of war. You'd have thought he'd want to pay his respects when he came home, but nothing of the sort. He stayed away. We didn't expect to hear from him, and I don't suppose we ever would have, but for the murder. You know, he was released from prison 12 years ago. I heard something to that effect, but still no contact, not even a beggar letter, I'm pleased to say. Might he have approached your son, Richard? You never knew him. Some other relative then? I hardly think so, but surely. There's a wife, of course. I suppose he must have got in touch with her, though if it was a handout he was hoping for. Wife? Yes, Edmund married a girl down in London just before he joined the army. We never met her, but they may have had some genuine affinity, even given that we learnt she was capable of, so I suppose it's possible he called back to her after his release. What do you mean, what she was capable of? Miriam looked past me at some spot on the wallpaper that might have been an irksome stain on her memory. It can't do any harm to tell you, I suppose. Henry went to great lengths to keep it quiet, but he had gone so long, and the name would totally stand for nothing in Hebden Bridge now. So what does it really matter? If it embarrassed Richard, so be it. She almost smiled at the thought. They are cousins after all. Who? Richmond and Edmund's child. There was a child? Oh yes, that was half the problem. I don't think Henry would have agreed, but for the fact that it was his niece we were talking about. Edmund had a daughter. According to his wife, though, I've always thought she might have. How old would she be? The daughter? About 35, I suppose. She shook her head in wonderment. Yes, she must be all that by now. How time flies. And then she looked back across at me. Is there something wrong, Mr. Napier? Thank you for listening.